They found her 3 days after the fire stopped burning. She was sitting in the ash, cross-legged, hands folded in her lap, eyes open. The entire valley had been consumed, every structure, every living thing. The trees stood like charred bone. The ground was gray and soft underfoot, still warm in places where the embers refused to die. But she was untouched. Not a mark on her, not a burn, not a scratch. The soldiers who discovered her thought she was dead at first, thought she was some kind of statue left behind by the flames. Then one of them got close enough to see her breathing. Shallow, steady, like sleep. They asked her name. She didn't answer. They asked what happened. She didn't move. They asked if anyone else survived. That's when she finally looked up. Her eyes were different. Not the color, not the shape. Something behind them had changed. Something had been replaced. The soldiers would later say they felt cold when she looked at them, that the air itself seemed to pull back. She stood without using her hands, brushed the ash from her dress, and walked. They called after her. They followed for a time, but eventually something unspoken made them stop, made them understand. This was not a rescue. This was a beginning.
Her family had been old. Not old in the way of generations, old in the way of mountains. Old in the way of names that appear in songs no one remembers writing. The kind of family that built temples before kingdoms existed, that carved symbols into stone when language was still finding its shape. They called themselves the Kael'thar, the Watchers of the Veil. For centuries, they had guarded something the world had forgotten to fear. A boundary, a border between what is and what must never be. It was not a place you could walk to, not a door you could open. It was a concept, a seal written in blood and passed down through ritual and sacrifice. Every generation, one child was chosen, marked, taught the old words, taught to feed the seal with their life force, to keep the barrier strong. It was not a curse, it was a covenant, and the Kael'thar had honored it for 3,000 years. They lived in isolation because they had to. Their valley was sacred ground. The soil itself hummed with ancient power. Visitors were not welcomed. Outsiders were turned away, not out of cruelty, but necessity. The barrier required silence, required stillness, required devotion unbroken by the noise of the wider world. But the world did not care about covenants. The world only cared about power.
A man came to them one winter. He called himself Erased the Learned. He was a scholar, he said, a historian. He had read about the Kael'thar in forbidden texts. He wanted only to observe, to document their ways. He lied. What he wanted was the seal itself, the power that held the veil closed. He believed it could be taken, harvested, used. He believed the Kael'thar were fools for wasting such strength on something as abstract as protection. He came with soldiers, with sorcery, with fire. The Kael'thar were not warriors. They were keepers, guardians. They knew the words to mend reality, but not the way to fight against steel and flame. They tried to reason with him, tried to explain what would happen if the seal was broken. Erased did not listen. He believed himself smarter, believed his research had revealed truths the Kael'thar were too primitive to understand. He believed the veil was a myth, that the danger was exaggerated, that the power could be controlled. He was wrong. When the seal shattered, the veil did not tear open all at once. It cracked like glass under pressure, and through those cracks something old began to whisper, something patient, something that had been waiting for this exact moment since before men built cities. But Erendor did not care. He took what he wanted. He stole fragments of the seal, pieces of carved stone that pulsed with contained energy. And then he gave the order. Burn it all. Kill everyone. Leave nothing behind. The fire was not natural. It was fueled by stolen magic. It moved like a living thing, consuming everything in its path. The Kael'thar tried to save their children, their elders, their sacred texts. It didn't matter. By dawn, the valley was silent. By midday, the fire had died. And by evening, there was nothing left but ash and the girl who would not burn.
Her name was Saeryn. She was 16 when her bloodline ended. In the days that followed, she did not speak, did not eat, did not sleep in the way others understood sleep. She walked through the ruins of her home. She touched the stones that had once been walls. She knelt in places where her family had died. And she listened. The veil was cracking, slowly, quietly, but she could hear it. The way you hear ice splitting on a frozen lake. The way you feel a storm before the first drop of rain. The whispers were louder now, closer. She understood what Erendor had done. He had not simply destroyed her family. He had doomed the world. And he had no idea. Saeryn had been the chosen one of her generation. The mark had been placed on her when she was 7. A symbol burned into her left shoulder blade. A binding written in a language older than thought. She had spent 9 years learning the rituals, learning the words, learning what it meant to hold the veil closed. But now there was no one to teach her the final rites. No elders to guide her. No family to share the burden. She was alone. And the weight of 3,000 years pressed down on her shoulders like a collapsed sky. At first, she thought she would restore the seal herself. She tried. She gathered what fragments of the old stones remained. She spoke the words she had been taught. She bled onto the altar that had somehow survived the flames. Nothing happened. The seal required more than one voice, more than one life. It required a family, a lineage, a chain of blood unbroken. Saeryn had none of those things. She was the last, and she was not enough. The realization did not break her. It hollowed her. It carved out everything soft inside her, and left only purpose. Cold, sharp, unyielding. If she could not restore the seal, then she would do the only thing left. She would find the man who broke it, and she would make him understand what he had done. Revenge was not the word for what she felt. Revenge was hot, angry, human. What Saeryn felt was older than that. It was the need for balance, for consequence, for the universe to correct itself through her hands. She did not hate Erendor. She simply knew he had to end. Saeryn spent the first year learning to disappear. She cut her hair, changed her name, wore the clothes of common travelers. She learned to smile when spoken to laugh when expected, to blend into crowds in markets and roadside inns. But beneath the performance, she was always listening, always watching. Erased had returned to the capital, to his estate, to his life of comfort and respect. He had presented the stolen fragments to the Royal Academy, called them relics of a lost civilization, wrote papers about their potential uses. He was celebrated, praised, called a visionary. No one knew what he had done to obtain them. No one asked. The Kael'thar had been forgotten long before they were destroyed. Their name existed only in obscure texts. Their purpose was myth. Erased had erased them from history as thoroughly as he had erased them from life. But Saeryn remembered. She tracked him carefully. She learned his routines, where he went, who he spoke to, what he valued. She watched him give lectures, watched him dine with nobility, watched him laugh with colleagues who had no idea what he truly was. She could have killed him 100 times. But she didn't, because death was not enough. Erased needed to understand, needed to see, needed to feel the weight of what he had broken before the end came. So Saeryn began to unravel his life, slowly, carefully. She started with his reputation. She forged letters, planted evidence, whispered rumors in the right ears. She made it seem as though Erased had been stealing credit for others' work, that his discoveries were fraudulent, that his research was built on lies. It took months, but eventually the Academy began to question him. Colleagues distanced themselves. Invitations stopped coming. Erased did not understand at first. He thought it was jealousy, politics. He tried to fight back, to defend himself. But the more he struggled, the deeper he sank. Next, Saeryn turned to his wealth. She learned who he owed, who he had borrowed from. She manipulated markets, sabotaged investments, made his debts come due all at once. His estate was seized, his collection sold. But still, Saeryn was not finished. She began to appear in his life, never close enough to be recognized, never obvious, just a figure in the crowd, a woman in the market, a traveler on the road. Always watching, always there. Erased began to notice, began to feel followed. He would turn suddenly, expecting to see someone, but there was only empty space. He would wake in the night, certain he had heard breathing. Nothing. Saeryn started drinking, started sleeping less. His hands shook, his eyes grew hollow. People whispered that he was going mad, and perhaps he was. But Saeryn knew the truth. He was finally beginning to feel what he had inflicted on others. The isolation, the fear, the certainty that something terrible was coming, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. She came to him on the anniversary of the fire. Erased was alone in a room he could barely afford. The walls were thin, the windows cracked. The furniture was old and borrowed. He sat at a desk covered in papers, research, diagrams, desperate attempts to rebuild what he had lost. The stolen fragments sat before him, glowing faintly, still humming with power. He did not hear the door open, did not hear her footsteps. But he felt the cold. That same cold the soldiers had felt 3 years ago, the air pulling back, the temperature dropping. He turned, and there she was. Saeryn stood in the doorway, older now, harder, but her eyes were the same. The eyes he had seen once before, in the valley, in the ash. The eyes of the girl who had survived his fire. Erased's face went pale, his mouth opened, closed. He reached for the fragments, for something, anything. But Saeryn did not move. "You don't remember me," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, empty of anger, empty of hate. "You burned my family, my home, my people, and you don't even remember." Erased tried to speak, tried to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. Because he did remember. Not her face, not her name, but he remembered the valley, the fire, the screaming. He had simply chosen to forget. You took something that wasn't yours, Saeryn continued. You broke a seal that held back the dark, and now it's coming. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when it arrives, it will consume everything, everyone, because of you.
Erased shook his head. No, the fragments are stable. I've studied them. There's no danger.
Listen, Saeryn whispered. And he did. For the first time in 3 years, Erased truly listened. And he heard it. The whispering, faint, distant, but there, growing louder. His eyes widened, his hands began to shake. What is that? The consequence, Saeryn said. The thing my family died to keep contained. The thing you set free. She stepped closer. You wanted power. You wanted knowledge. You thought you were smarter than 3,000 years of tradition. And now you'll spend whatever time you have left knowing what's coming, knowing you caused it, knowing there's nothing you can do to stop it. She placed something on the desk. A fragment of stone, carved with symbols, the same symbols that had been on the seal. This is all that's left of my bloodline, she said. Keep it. Study it. Maybe you'll finally understand what you destroyed. Saeryn turned to leave. Erased called after her, begged her to wait, to explain, to tell him how to fix it. But she was already gone, and the whispering grew louder. Saeryn walked into the night and did not look back. Erased spent the rest of his days trying to repair the seal. He died 10 years later, alone, broken, haunted by whispers that never stopped. The fragments he stole were eventually lost, scattered, forgotten. And the veil continued to crack. Saeryn did not stop it. She could not. But she lived long enough to see others begin to notice, to see scholars and mages realize something was wrong, to see new guardians rise to try to hold back what was coming. She had not saved the world, but she had made sure the man who doomed it would carry that weight until his last breath. Some legacies cannot be restored, some damage cannot be undone, but consequence always finds its way home. And the ones who break the world are always the last to understand what they've destroyed. Until it's far too late.